as Graham said, I'm the engineering practice manager here at Engineering New Zealand. And this is this talk is about a article that that I wrote recently in conjunction with Mumtaz Parker from Water New Zealand around the bounds of competence and how we can recognize where our bounds of competence are, but also where the bounds of competence are of those who are working with us and for us. And so, for example, in Tamlin's position, as we heard, she's managing a team of people. And how do we know where the bounds of competence of those people are? Because once we can start to define those bounds, then there's two things that we can do. I've always found in my career that I enjoy being stretched. I enjoy being stretched a bit, but I don't enjoy being, forced too far out of my comfort zone. There's a fine line in it. But, it also allows us to establish our goals and say, well, whereabouts do we want to grow to, either as a person or as an engineer? And once we understand where our current state is, our current state of knowledge, then we can say, okay, well, here's our goal. And that gives us the gap between the two and put in place a structured program to be able to do that. So it lets you start to build your CPD. And so what is competence? In the first place, if we say to ourselves, what is competence actually? Well, you can kind of break it down into having the knowledge, the skills, and the attributes to be able to fulfill tasks. And if you kind of think of it as a pyramid, right, it is the accumulation of your knowledge up until that point, and so if we look at the idea that every day we learn something new, then every day we're just adding onto that pyramid, and so every day, hopefully, we're a little bit more competent, a little bit more knowledgeable than the day that we were before. But our competency can lapse, right? And so as a good example of that, I haven't worked as a practicing engineer since I came to Engineering New Zealand, and so would I be competent to be able to go straight back into a design role at the moment? Well, I still understand the general principles, and so when I'm talking to engineers about the principles behind design, I understand those, but I may not be able to, it's unlikely that I would be able to go straight back and undertake design work without being fairly heavily supervised. Certainly in things that I haven't done, a lot of. But, and so, your competency can lapse. And if it is something that, if you're undertaking a job that you have only undertaken infrequently or that you haven't done for a while, then it is really worth acknowledging that within ourselves and seeking some guidance upon that, whether that is from a person that you're working with or reaching out to somebody else in another firm. Something that I found fantastic, when I've been working as an engineer, is that it can be a little bit daunting to pick up the phone and reach out to somebody, but I've never actually had anybody turn around and not provide the help that I've needed, or make me feel like an idiot for asking, which is nice. So you can actively work to increase your own competence, and there's a few ways that you can do that. You can pick up the phone, you can do the reading, you can go on courses. There's a myriad of different ways that you can do it. And I encourage you to read through the competency article, because we do go through quite a number of those on there. It's on the website, and we can put a link in the description afterwards. And you can help increase those other people's competence as well. Just as I was saying before, Tamlin's a team leader, and once she has identified bounds of other people's competence, and she knows where they want to grow to in their career, then she can actively work to help that person, either by mentoring and providing them with challenging work and so on to grow inside that role. Now, a large part of that thing that we need to be aware of is in our self-awareness, and there's 4 stages of this, but realistically we are going to look at 3. There are experts in here as well. But the first one that we have is where we are, consciously incompetent. And so for the majority of us, being an astronaut, for example, would be a good example of being consciously incompetent. I don't know how to fly a rocket to the moon or to the space station, and I very much doubt that anybody who's listening to this webinar does either. So if we were going to be doing that, then we would be consciously incompetent. Then we can, and that's a pretty safe place to be, because we acknowledge that we don't know, and how can we go about learning those skills to do so. Then we have, conscious and unconscious incompetence. And so there's things that I don't know about, and therefore I'm incompetent at them. And so I'm unconsciously incompetent, and that's another stage. But then we have conscious competence, and so it's where we are working well within the bounds of our competence, and that's a nice stage to be at, right? And so we go in and we can make sure that we are doing the job to a good standard every day, making sure that we're following those good practice guidelines and working to the best of our ability. The danger comes in and where we are unconsciously incompetent, because it is something that is just outside the bounds of our experience, right? And so, and we may think to ourselves that this is fairly similar, and so a good example of that would be moving from, and I'm going to talk about structural engineering here because I'm a structural engineer. And so a common place where people start to get a bit unstuck is where they either move from designing the likes of industrial buildings like warehouses, and then they do residential buildings, or vice versa, right? And there are complexities to both, and there are subtleties to both. And if we think that, the skills are immediately transferable, then unfortunately, that's not the case. And we really need to acknowledge, if we are doing work outside of those things or something that's new, then bounce the idea off of somebody. It's the best way that we can, find out if there are new things in there, that we don't know about. And so if, for example, I was going to be doing I know that Ian specializes in residential work. He's been doing it for a long time. If there was some work that I was going to be undertaking that might be a little bit unsure about, then I could pick up the phone to Ian and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is the general things that I'm thinking about. Do you think that's a good idea? And so, understanding the limits of our competence and admitting those, is really important to both ourselves and other people's perception of us, both as an individual and as a profession. And because when we say that we don't know and that we need to consult somebody else, then actually that's really reassuring for people. And a good example of that is if we think about our doctors, the GPs, right? The GPs that we see most often. And so a GP is somebody that we go in and we say, okay, we've got a certain relationship with them, and we expect them to be able to do a reasonable amount of things. But as a general example, as a specific example, I snapped my ACL a couple of years ago in my knee, and the doctor said to me, you need to be going and seeing a specialist about that, so that person can make sure that I've got the right diagnosis and then potentially put you through to surgery. That was very reassuring for me. I knew that my doctor understood that enough to be able to provide an initial diagnosis and say, I know what I think the problem is, but I don't know enough in this particular area to be able to provide you with an exact answer for it. I'm going to refer you on to a specialist. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to be very aware of, particularly as general practice engineers, is to say, okay, I have a broad understanding of these issues, but then exactly as Tamlin was saying before, structural engineers aren't geotechnical engineers. And so whereabouts do the bounds of those competencies lie? Because we know that they cross over, right? And so we've all done geotechnical papers, but how do you know whereabouts those lie? And so when you get the more complex geotechnical work, then you need to be handing that over to a geotechnical engineer, and vice versa for geotechs and structural too. And so, how do we go about growing the bounds of our competence? Well, the first thing, of course, is, as I said a couple of times now, is to identify the current bounds of our competence. And one way of doing that is to reflect on our current and past work and critically reflect. Right now, what I've learned is that we don't really get taught to critically reflect on our work as engineers. And my wife she used to work as a teacher, and now she's an auditor for teachers. And as part of their training, they get taught to critically reflect on things that they have done so that they're continuously improving. And she teaches that now. It's very useful. My conversations that I've had with her, I've learned a lot about how to do that and to build in that cycle so that, I do try to continuously improve. Now, we are writing an article about that and providing some templates that you can use and examples of critical reflection at the moment. That's going to be coming out after this in the next month or so. And so, it's great for CPD too, because once you are critically reflecting on something, then you can either present that learning to others, or you can put that down as a learning record and say, this is what I've done. This is a project that I undertook. This is what I learned from it. This is what went well. This is what didn't go so well. This is what I'm going to continue doing. And this is what I'm going to stop doing in the future. But there's other things that we can be using. And so if we were going to be looking for what are we going to be doing to be identifying our needs, then you can be looking at for technical skills, you can be looking for the body of knowledge and skills. Now in New Zealand, of course, we have currently through the Society for Fire Protection Engineers, the SFPE, where there's another one for the Geotechnical Society. CSOC have got one. I know that the Engineering General Practitioners Group have been working on a body of knowledge and skills. There's the competencies that are on the Engineering New Zealand website for CPEng. And you can also look overseas. I don't think that the Mechanical Engineering Group in New Zealand have got theirs up yet. I know that they're working on them, but you can look over at the likes of IMechE or IEEE and start to look at those, at what the bounds of competence, the body of knowledge and skills that they have there, and say, well, what do I need to grow? But you've also got things. So as we start to move, then some people will be very happy staying inside our technical design roles, right? But for other people, moving into team leadership and so on, we need to learn different skills. And how do we do that? Because to be able to, one of the things that I commonly hear is, why don't engineers have a bigger voice in the way that things are being done throughout society? And that's, we need to improve our soft skills. So how do we do that, right? So it's another competency that we can be growing. And communication is the basis of a lot of complaints for engineers. It's a really, really common thread throughout them. And we're going to be putting out some more communications around that. But also you've got cultural intelligence. And so what Tamlin was talking about just earlier, is understanding the culture that people are coming from, and then making sure that you understand and can empathize with the way that they do things. How can you build your listening skills and, our ability to engage in teamwork and create teamwork as well. Critical thinking, works very well with the reflection. But also, how do we build our own things like integrity? And so when we are looking at our integrity, it's our own brand, right? And so if, for example, I have personally, I have a very strict rule that I'll never lie. And so when I'm talking to my children, they know that when I'm talking to them, then if I say that I'm going to do something, then I'll do it. And if I can't, then there's a very good reason why, and I'll always tell them the truth. And so I have quite a high personal integrity with my children, and I like to think others at work as well. But also you can be teaching things like goal setting, stress management, conflict resolution, and be working to improve our memory. My memory relies a lot on a piece of paper that I keep on my desk here, and God forbid if I lose the piece of paper. So we need to have backups. So, you know, as I said, technical skills are great, and they will take us to a certain level. But if we want to be able to progress down those things, then we need to be looking at things like, you know, leadership skills. And what do you do to grow those leadership skills? You know, and so you've got to be looking at things like empathy, which God knows it's not a strong point for me, and it's not a strong point for a lot of other engineers as well. I actually had to Google what empathy is. And it's the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. It's not sympathy, right? I can see Tamlin smiling at me in the background. But what it is, it involves putting yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding why they have those particular feelings. And it takes practice, right? It really does. It's worth developing. I've started working on it now. There's some really good things on YouTube. I think it's Simon Sinek is someone, if you're interested in Googling them. Communication, as I said, communication is a skill that a lot of engineers aren't particularly good at. When I first became an engineer, I became an engineer halfway through a career. And before that, I'd been in business development. And it kind of shocked me when I went to my first seminars and everybody was standing around and they would either talk to someone in their own company or they'd stare at their shoes or their phone. And there is an old joke that says, how do you tell an engineer that's got an outgoing personality, or it's the one they're looking at your shoes instead of their own? And there's a reasonable amount of truth in that. Conflict resolution, as I said, you know, so all of those sorts of things are very skills. So the other thing that we've got to look at is how do we grow the competence of others, right? And so this is where we really need to clearly define what is their current state of competence, right? So how do you know where it is, and then how do you get to grow it? And so what are the goals? What are the goals that we're looking for? And quite often, you know, we could say that, well, we want to become CPeng, or we want to achieve a certain thing which is set by an organization, you know, and so, okay, that's great. Well, that gives you a pretty clear benchmark, you know, because it's like, all right, well, if I want to become CPeng, then I need to acquire skills in these particular levels, right? You could say that, you know, they could be being set by an individual. And so there are many of the skills that I've just been discussing. Excuse me, empathy as an example. You know, how do you clearly define if you're becoming more empathetic? Well, realistically, I think that you would need to have that discussion with your team leader or something like that. My wife is very good at empathy, and she frequently tells me where I'm falling short in that sort of area. And so how do I know that I'm getting better at it? Well, she'll probably tell me. And so provided that we have those sorts of people where, you know, we can rely on honest feedback, then that's very valuable for us. We can also have things where, you know, we just have an agreement with our team leader, and that could be done being quarterly, or it could be 6 monthly, or it could be your yearly reviews. Realistically, yearly reviews are a little bit too far, you know, apart for defining and growing towards goals, I think. But if we looked at it quarterly, then that's quite good. You could be saying, well, I want to be growing in these areas. This is my yearly goal, and this is how I'm going to be growing towards it at the moment, right? And then you can be saying, all right, well, I'm going to need perhaps some formal training courses in these, you know, and so maybe you want to be doing some, once again, going back to seismic engineering, structural engineering, I want to be looking at being able to do some seismic assessments as an example. And so how are you going to be becoming more competent at doing seismic assessments? Well, the first thing that you need to be doing is to be reading through and understanding the guidelines. And so how do you prove that you understand some of the things behind the guidelines and those core principles? And then from there on in, maybe shadowing someone else and working with them on seismic assessments and so on your own. But clear communication between yourself and your team leader is pretty critical on that. Now, finding your current competence, of course, that's a little bit harder, right? How do we do it? And so there's tests. You know, as engineers, we should all be used to doing tests of one kind or another. We all had to pass them so that we could become engineers in the first place. There's a number of things that we can be doing out there. You know, there's some fairly wickedly tricky ones on iStruct-D that I've done. There's often I've talked to a number of engineers where they say that or engineering companies, and they say that they have like an entry criteria. And so on your interview, then you get given 10 questions and work through these things from first principles, which could be quite a good way to do it. Feedback from your peers, you know, how am I getting on? You know, I've been working on this. Do you think that, how do you rate my work? It can be a really difficult conversation to have. And once again, you need to make sure that you're getting in touch with somebody who is willing to provide, you know, potentially critical feedback, because it's no use just getting compliments when there's when we're not doing particularly well. We can be looking at our work to date and saying, here's how we have grown. And I know that, you know, from my past experience, that each year that I was working as an engineer, then I could be looking back on the work that I had done and say, oh, okay, well, that's great. You know, I've learned these skills. My calculations are much easier to read. You know, I'm describing my thoughts better. I'm making sure that I put in a design features report with each one, or clearly explaining my assumptions, whatever else it may be. And, you know, your self-assessment. So how would you undertake something like that? But, you know, you need to be able to measure that towards a goal. And so growing your competence, right? So it needs to be transparent, essentially. And so you've got to have a transparent framework, and you've got to have a transparent guideline as well. And it's got to be realistic, right? You can't say, well, you know, I've just graduated from university or Polytech, and in 12 months time, I want to be CPeng, because that's not realistic. Whereas if you said, hey, look, you know, I'm going to work, I've just graduated, I'm going to be doing this, and I'm going to set myself a 5-year time frame to become CPeng. And what do I need to do within this year? You know, I've looked at my 12 competencies, and what do I need to do this year to be able to do that? Well, that's, you know, a pretty good way, and then you can start to do it. Mentoring is terrifically valuable. And I personally think that not only being mentored, but actually mentoring other people, right, is tremendously powerful. And so once you're about, I'd probably say about a year to 18 months in, right, then you're starting to understand your basic concepts and to be able to apply them to some relatively simple things. And so then you can teach the next lot of graduates, right? And I know that, you know, when I was doing that and I had to explain retaining walls, you know, just the small design retaining walls that we were designing, and I had to explain that to the next lot of graduates, then that really boosted my understanding, because people would ask questions and then I'd have to think about the answers. Also, explaining things to children is amazing. If you can explain engineering concepts to an 8-year-old and have them understand it, you've got it. You know, you've really got it. And so that's where I'd recommend things like the Wonder Project and the other things that we provide through Engineering New Zealand. But there's research, there's literature, videos. You know, you can talk to experts. As I said, there's very few people that won't pick up the phone when you give them a call. And the great thing about New Zealand is that it's such a small place. Virtually everybody can get an expert's phone number if they work at it a little bit. But we can practice activities. You know, there's worked examples that we can be going through. We can be just discussing things with peers. One of the great things that about, working in an engineering office is the ability to lean over the cubicle and say, how do I really get this? What do you reckon about this? Right. And God knows I still do that now. I think that just about everybody on this call, possibly however many people are actually on the call now, have probably received a phone call from me at some point saying, I really don't understand this. Can you give me a hand? Present the learnings to others, right? So one of the things that I've always found really useful was to be able to research a topic enough so that I understood it well enough that I could then present it in even a 15 or 20 minute presentation to my peers, and preferably people who understood more than I could. I remember doing one on strain creep within beam column joints, and gosh, it took me hours and hours and hours to research that and then understand it well enough that I could present that to other people, but I still remember it now. And so that's learning and then teaching, and then you've got formal courses, right? But formal courses should only be a tiny fraction, maybe 10% of what you're actually doing to grow your competence. And remember to record your development. That's something that the assessors for CPEng are constantly saying, that when they talk to people, then their CPD is normally quite good, but their records are terrible, right? And so you can't just put down that I read, for 40 hours and that's my CPD for the year. It's really not acceptable, right? Try and make a note in your diary to say what you've been doing and when and how you've been growing. And review your competence regularly. You talk to your supervisors, talk to your peers, talk to your mentor, and say, hey, this is what I've been doing. What's your opinion on it? Here are my goals. And that is about the end of that. I think I'm bang on time there, actually. So I took into account the fact that I get nervous and talk faster. So if I jab it all my way through that, sorry.
We do thank you, Martin. Most fluent address, and yes, you think quickly. Now I've got one question here, and I've got one of my own. So I'll give you the easy one for myself, because you've probably heard it before. What is Engineering New Zealand doing to assist the likes of structural engineers into perhaps a tiered system of competency within the discipline of geotechnical engineering?
Well, we've got that's an interesting one, and we can't assess. The system isn't set up for assessing people in tiers at the moment, right? We are hoping that may change with licensing, but that will be driven by the government, of course. And nobody's really sure at the moment, as far as I know, exactly how that's going to be working. And so at the moment, you are either competent to undertake complex work, right, in a discipline, or you have not shown that you are competent to undertake that complex work. And it's really, whereabouts does work become complex, right? Because as general practitioners, then we can undertake work to a number of, in a number of different things. And I know that in the years that I was working, I did some basic stormwater design. We were calculating catchment areas and doing soak pits and some pavement design for driveways, as well as, the normal structural engineering stuff that I was doing. None of that was particularly complex, right? But I suspect that what you're talking about is, liquefaction assessments, right? Liquefaction assessments is defined by the NZGS and MB as being complex work, right? And so to be able to undertake that type of work, then you need to have been assessed as being competent to do so by, passing that part in that practice area through geotechnical. So you can do it. There are people who have been assessed as being, for structural and for geotechnical work. You just need to put together your body of knowledge, essentially, for those and apply for it.
Yes, I noticed that, and just helping you answer that question, if you break it down to a shallow subsurface investigation to a deep one, and it is probably easier to get structural engineers into just assessing the shallow foundation work and becoming competent at that, and that could be a split. Perhaps it is a split already.
Well, it is. That's why we designed that flowchart with the Engineering General Practitioners Group and the Geotechnical Society and a few BCAs last year. And so that does, split out where the competencies of someone of your average person who is a geotechnical, a structural engineer can undertake, that type of work, and then where you need to be a geotechnical engineer to be undertaking that. And so that was, generally agreed between various BCAs and the Engineering General Practitioners Group, New Zealand, the Geotechnical Society, and Engineering New Zealand as well, and has been accepted, more or less up and down the country because of those types of problems, and because we had been seeing an uptick in the number of complaints that were being brought against structural engineers undertaking geotechnical work.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Now I have got one other question that has been sent in by Andy Duncan, and I'll read it out to you. I see innovation as key to New Zealand's future. It also seems to me that there is a clash between innovation and competency restrictions. That is, perhaps communication and acceptance of risk become more important as the degree of innovation increases. It's quite I might just reread that last part. Perhaps communication and acceptance of risk become more important as the degree of innovation increases.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Hi, Andy. Good to hear from you again, by the way. And so, here's one of the people that I have actually rung and said, what do you think about this in the past? And so I don't know if you were at the CSOC conference last year, but there was and sorry, I'm just Googling it now. There was a paper that Rick Henry wrote and presented at the last CSOC conference, which was something like, here it is, innovation, the next big thing or the next big failure. And so he presented that at the Concrete New Zealand Concrete Learner Society as well. And so, yeah, it is that, right? And so if we look at innovation, then some things have worked quite well, but then some things have worked not particularly well either. And I'm sure that we could all look at the likes of precast floors and say, well, that was a big innovation, but how well did we understand how we could fit that into, the designs that we're making, and do we really understand it all? And so, yeah, there's a line, there is a line between what's being innovative and, maybe incrementally extending our knowledge out through that, and then taking those sorts of leaps. It's a hard one to be able to overcome.
Okay, that was
I would highly recommend reading through Rick's paper. It's really, really good.
Thanks, Martin. There's one just come in here, and I will encourage others to put their questions in. Thank you. We don't have a lot here, but here's one here. It's anonymous, apart from the website. How do you suggest someone should go about challenging the competence of an engineer where there is a disagreement around the need for a specialist knowledge?
That's actually, okay, so that's a good question. And so that was one of the things about why we wrote that, the geotechnical flowchart as an example, right? And so you could start to say that if we move back to that example that I gave where I said, okay, well, I've done a bit of stormwater design and soak pits and so on. Well, those are really, sort of pretty well embedded in acceptable solutions, and there's various things like that. And we've all studied it, right? We've all done various papers on it. But what's more, there's, you know, it was being reviewed by people who'd done it before when I did the work. And so with those, if you're looking at, does this cross over into the bounds of complexity for another engineering discipline, right? Probably look at the body of knowledge and skills for that discipline and say, well, is this what they're looking to be assessed on? You know, and so if we're looking for, and gosh, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough with the geotechnical or fire body of knowledge and skills to do that. But let's say that you've got a geotechnical engineer, reversing it the other way, right, who was saying, well, I want to be doing some bridge design, right? But your specialized field that you've been assessed as competent in is geotechnical, right? Well, bridge design is in the body of knowledge and skills as being a piece of complex engineering, right? And so I would suggest, if I was looking at it, as saying, well, have you been assessed as being CPeng structural, you know, probably with a focus on bridges? Because if you haven't, then CSOC is saying that is complex work, right? And so I would be kind of looking to those types of organizations with that specialist knowledge out there. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Here's another query. If one's a structural engineer, I could see perhaps the query whether being a structural engineer with respect to earthquake is another questionable area that needs training and more experience. And hence, when one moves to that, starts filling out ISA reports, one needs to be competent to do so.
Oh, yeah, look, I 100% agree. And I have had queries about this in the past, whereby people will give me a call and say, can you tell me whereabouts the guides are? You know, the guidelines to download to look at from the NZSEE website. And I say, well, when was the last time that you did that? You know, and are you a sole practitioner who's doing it on your own? And quite often the answer will come back, yes. It's like, well, this isn't something that you should be doing. You know, seismic assessments and so on are very complex, and you have to understand the underlying principles behind them. And so if you are going to be doing that type of work, then really it is something that needs to be overseen by someone who's experienced in that, right? And so reach out to somebody who is, and so either pass the job off to someone who is looking at it, or see if you can do the work underneath, essentially. And this is, you know, where we have to put aside our ego and say, you know, I'm not competent about this one. Can you watch what I'm doing, you know, and just provide a review? And yeah, okay, it may cost us money, but increasing our competence can frequently cost us money, but it pays off in the long run.
Thanks, Martin. I just give one other comment and what you said in your discussion earlier, that I personally get a lot of satisfaction out of teaching and trying to, and that helps me actually in my own logic thoughts. When you're speaking to someone else and discussing something, you actually get better at going through the basic logic of your mechanisms and so forth. So I do thank you for your whole response today. And I think we've got one other question just come through. So just bear with me. It's a fairly full one from Michael. We shall have the concept that someone can be assessed as competent, and then they are by default seen as competent to supervise or assess others. As a profession, we have virtually no control over engineers using their competency to improve the work of others, even though we never review or assess our engineers in the area supervising others. How can we introduce the concept that supervising and managing others is a skill in itself that should be approved or assessed, using the 1, 2, 3 analogy, with level 3 qualified to supervise level 1? But CPeng is only assessed as level 2, independent practice. That's a very intense question, but I think it's
Great question. Thank you
yeah,
for bringing that up. It's not one that
yeah.
I'd ever considered before,
No,
but it is a really good point. And exactly as I brought up in the webinar, you know, something that engineers are frequently not good at, and I stick my hand up for this myself, is the ability to manage and to lead others, right? It's one of the reasons why I thoroughly enjoy the role that I have now, is because it's not one of my strengths, right? And so it is something that I want to learn how to do better. But yes, you know, it is a really good point. So how do we go about that? And we do have on the Engineering New Zealand website, practice note 14, I think it is, which details design office practice. Yes, it's something like practice note 14, structural design office practice. And that does go into, you know, quality control processes in a design office. The other thing that we could be looking at are around the peer review guidelines, and in particular, CSOC have got a very good design review guide, which I would recommend looking at. But no, to go back to what you were asking, Michael, no, we don't have at the moment the, you know, for going through and guiding and reviewing others. And it's an excellent point. Thank you. But do I have an immediate answer on how we can fix that? No, I'm sorry, I don't.
okay, we don't seem to have any other questions, and time is going on. But Ian of our committee wants another wee crack at you, so we'll hand it over to Ian.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Well, it's just another question for you, Martin. And you mentioned about mentoring.
Yes.
And I was thinking back to my early days as an engineer. Quite a bit of it was, you know, traveling overseas, changing jobs, moving around, and quite a dispersed learning experience. And I thought to myself, boy, oh boy, it would have been wonderful to have had an ENZ type mentor through those years, through those early years, somebody that would still be there, even though I changed jobs or even changed country for that matter. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, boy, oh boy, how great would it be to encourage young engineers to join the ENZ mentoring program. I just picked up a mentor the other day, and the guy's based up in Kiribati, up in the islands. Oh, wow. And I was quite amazed by that. But again, you know, you can be anywhere in the world now and share on video links and things. So just raising that question with perhaps for the younger engineers with us today, that you know, get onto that mentoring program and make use of it.
Yes, I agree. And I think that we need to remember as well that one mentor doesn't necessarily fulfill all needs, right? And so as an example of that, my direct manager, Tanya, is someone that I reach out to as a mentor for, you know, for some leadership or general communication skills. She's, you know, she's very experienced. She has, she's an engineer herself, but she mostly focused in roading and water and waste. And working for a very large consultancy. She was the one of the general managers for New Zealand for Stantec for quite some time. And so, but when I'm looking for, you know, specific technical sort of information, then there are other people that I ring, you know, and so Gordon Hughes is someone that I'm fairly frequently on the phone to, you know, and Gordon's fantastic. He's pretty well everything that you can look for in a mentor, you know, humble and willing to impart knowledge, and he normally answers the phone, which is also something that's extremely valuable. So yeah, don't ever think that, you know, just one mentor covers all bases, because in my experience it almost never does.
Right. I see there's one more question up there for you, Graham.
Oh, there is, just come up, yes. What would be the response for ENZ and Auckland Council BCAs with few practices working beyond their approved competencies. Is that a breach to CPE rules? Thanks for this great talk. There you go.
Sorry, can you read that out again? I didn't really understand the question.
What will be the response of ENZ and Auckland Council BCAs with few practices working beyond their approved competencies? Is that a breach to CPE rules? I'm not sure that I understand that either.
Well, I can't answer for Auckland Council because I work for Engineering New Zealand. But yeah, it is one of the difficulties about CPENG is that, you know, it's really only we can answer the bounds of our own competence. And that's, you know, the idea of giving this talk today. And yes, if you see somebody, you know, working outside of the bounds of their competence, then it can be very difficult to pick up the phone and say to them, are you sure that you're competent to be working on this? You can always raise a concern through Engineering New Zealand, but at the same time, you know, quite often I'll get a phone call as well, you know, and those phone calls stay anonymous and don't necessarily have to lead to a complaint unless you, or raising a concern unless you want to make one.
Okay, Martin, just before I hand it back over to Ian, I think what I've gained from this is your discussion in the question time on mentoring. I think that's a very important thing for all young engineers, particularly to have that, you know, link to others. And for those engineers that work by themselves, it's about time they started talking to others. But thank you very much.
Completely agree. The reaching out to others is brilliant. Yep.
Okay, I hand it back to you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. And I totally agree that, you know, this is part of why the EGP was formed, was to encourage engineers, particularly those working in isolation or in small companies, to reach out to others, you know, grab a coffee and actually start the conversations. It's amazing what just rubbing shoulders with another engineer can do for you. So again, thank you again to Tamlin today for your question and answer series. That was wonderful. Despite your COVID, you did so well. And Martin, wonderful presentation with lots of meat in that for us to work on. Now, our next webinar will be on the 14th of July and will be presented by Chris Hackney, who will cover recent changes to the wind loading code, AS 1170. Chris is a member of the committee reviewing AS 1170, so he's right up with the plate. Also in August, we have a webinar with the topic of professional insurance, and our guest will be Craig Lewis from CEAS. So if you have any questions for Craig, we're going to do a sort of an interview with him, and we want to ask him all the hard questions. If you've got any questions about your insurance or insurance in general, liability, put them through to us via the website. Now, also, don't forget to send us any feedback you may have or suggestions on our webinars, and also suggestions for future ones. We're looking at possibly one on AS 2870. For those that live in the North Island particularly, that's important. But if you have any suggestions at all, it might be quite a small topic or something you really feel passionate about, drop us an email and it might be something we can pick up on.
Can I just ask, Ian, you've said put it on the website. What's the website? Oh,
sorry, the ENZ. Go to the ENZ website and then look for the EGP, and there's an email link there. Am I right? I think I'm right on that. That's the best way to do it. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you all, next month, sorry. And we'll see you all then, and we'll hand back to Holly to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We will see you at the next webinar. Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.